California beaches, the California coast, one of the most pristine and beautiful areas in the world. But who should have access to it? Joining us this morning is California Coastal Commissioner Aaron Peskin, who's also on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Years ago, California voters said that California beaches belong to California, belong to the country. Correct?
Absolutely. In 1972, the voters of the state of California passed Proposition 20, which ultimately created the Coastal Commission. But the right to access to our beaches and the fact that beaches are part of the public domain is actually in our state constitution.
All right. Now, the beaches and access to them, these beautiful escapes, is in the Constitution. However, getting to those beaches is now up a big question. For example, this area, I believe this is down around Hollister Ranch, a huge area down around Santa Barbara, but the only way you can get at it is by boat or by kayak because the people that own the land adjacent to it have questions about letting people in, correct?
Absolutely correct.
And this is not isolated. There are other beaches, Martin's Beach and Opal Cliffs up in the south of San Francisco that are also.
So let me start with the good news, Phil. Of our 1,270 miles of coastline, over the last 40 years, the Coastal Commission has gotten hundreds of new access points, all the way from the Oregon border, all the way down to the Mexican border. But there's some holdouts out there, and Hollister Ranch is certainly one of them. They have never provided public access to 8.5 miles of shoreline that the public wants to go to. It's been the subject of controversy. It's been the subject of a settlement agreement that's gotten a lot of public scrutiny. We've received over 1,500 comments at the Coastal Commission about that.
Okay, let's take that one for example. You have a group of homeowners, rather wealthy, who say they have questions about allowing people through their land to get to the beach. Now, the subtext of that might be they also have questions about people being on the beach, right? Lots of people. They've agreed to what?
So this is a long, complicated saga, but there was an easement from an inland parcel to the beach that was never used, never perfected, that was the subject of a lawsuit that ultimately, under a settlement, became the right to access the beach by the public, by kayak, by boat, and by a small number of managed trips in groups of 20. A lot of people will find that settlement to be less than ideal, and I think that was the sentiment of the commission, was that we were between a rock and a hard place, given what we had to work with. But the level of public sentiment, I think, is a silver lining because people do want access, and the commission is very focused on renewing its efforts to get public access through Hollister Ranch in Santa Barbara County.
Okay, that's one example. If we have this agreement, which would allow a limited number of, like, let's say, underprivileged kids in there, or veterans, or some select groups rather than the general public, is that good enough, or should the Coastal Commission withdraw from that agreement and push for even broader access?
It's not good enough, but this particular settlement is not the way to get there. I think ultimately we're going to have to get legislative action by the state legislature, as we have in other instances, as we're seeing in Martin's Beach in San Mateo County, where the state legislature has passed Senate bills in this session to help restore public access to Martin's Beach that was bought by one very, very rich guy who has shut off historic public access. That's going to be the future for Hollister Ranch.
Okay, what about, let's say, Opal Cliffs in the Santa Cruz area?
Yeah, you've just hit the big three: Hollister Ranch, Opal Cliffs, and Martin's Beach. Those are the big three right now in the state of California, which for 1,270 miles of coastline is pretty darn good. Opal Cliffs is a weird little park. It's publicly owned by a special district in Santa Cruz County. I actually went there the day before yesterday to inspect it myself. It is the only public access point in the state of California where there is a fee to get to the beach. The Coastal Commission is working to get rid of that fee. Stay tuned.
Okay, I want you to stick around because I want to take this subject a little bit further in our next segment. Do you have a couple of minutes?
I'd be happy to spend my morning with you, Phil.
Oh, that could be interesting. California's coastline. We supposedly own it, but who gets to actually go to it? Joining us this morning is California Coastal Commissioner Aaron Peskin, who's also on the Board of Supervisors. You know, our Devin Veely and Kit Doe have been doing a series of fantastic stories about the beaches of California, the remote beaches of California, some of the most picturesque landscape in the world. Now, we're supposed to have access to it, but there's questions about whether or not we're actually getting our value out of this, right? This is an ongoing controversy all over the state, isn't it? People next to the beaches saying you can't get through our property to get to them.
As Peter Douglas, the famous former executive director of the Coastal Commission for decades, said, saving the coast is an ongoing mission. It's never saved. You got to keep saving it, not just from people who want to block access off, but people who want to do inappropriate development. I have to say the California Coastal Act is one of the most incredible pieces of legislation anywhere in the United States of America, and in large part has actually fulfilled its mission and its goals. California's 1,270 miles of coast has countless access points, but there are a handful of players who want to keep the public off their beaches. The public's beaches. These are beaches of the public.
Because we talked about that a little earlier about, access. But what is the deal here? What is a beach and what is private property? Because when you drive down, Highway 1 or down the coast, you see, all right, you have the coast right there. Does the coast end with the cliffs and does the rest private property? What is the coast?
So the median high tide level, everything below that is owned by the people. So at low tide, anywhere in the state of California, you can walk up and down any beach.
All right.
Many of the beaches in California are public. We have hundreds of beaches that are owned by the state of California, state parks, local parks, and
so where's the line on private property? Because people own up to what? Right up to right up to there, right? And then that's private property. And then the beach is public.
Right,
Is that how it
and
goes?
the Coastal Act actually respects private property, but there are provisions in the Coastal Act that say when you get a coastal development permit to build a house or to build a development or to do other kind of development, that at that point the Coastal Commission can obtain an access way to get public access to the beach.
Okay, what about properties that were owned and haven't been redone since we passed this?
Those are properties like Hollister Ranch that there's no public access at. And there are different ways to do that. There are, as a matter of fact, there's a pending development permit at Hollister Ranch that will come before the commission in September. We'll see how the commission deals with it.
Okay, how do you balance the rights of the homeowners or the property owners adjacent to the beach with the rights of the public? For example, if we opened everything up to access, who's responsible for taking care of the beach?
Well, Mother Nature takes care of a lot of it, and local governments take care of a lot of it. I mean, whether it's local rec and park departments, local police enforcement departments, that's who takes care of public lands throughout the state of California.
And so the idea would be we have access and then the locals. Now,
and remember, the Coastal Commission does beach cleanups every year up and down the state's 1,270 miles of coastline. We're all in it together.
Okay. Now, you forged various agreements, or a lot of this is winding up typical California. It's going to go to the courts. It's going to go through commissions. It's going to go through hearings. Eventually, is the state going to have to pony up some money here?
It is very likely in some of these cases, like Martin's Beach. In the Martin's Beach case, the state of California in this session actually just ponied up money in a special fund, as has the county of San Mateo ponied up money. Eventually, that money is going to be spent, and that is part of private property and buying and selling.
Okay, so why don't we just take over all the beaches and just say have it done with?
Look, the concept that our beaches in the state of California, whether you live in a coastal city, whether you live inland, whether you're a visitor to the state of California, is what makes California one of the greatest states in the nation.
Oh, well, and aside from playing the Star-Spangled Banner, now what do you mean?
I mean, people's experience on the coast, and whether it's on bluffs or whether it's on the beaches, are really part of what makes California, California.
And so, in other words, we should help pay for it.
Absolutely.
There we go. That's what it is. Coastal Commissioner Aaron Peskin, San Francisco Board of Supervisors, once again in the middle of it.